Hi and welcome to Real World Facilitation, where we're on a mission to end boring and wasteful meetings and workshops. I'm Kieran, and in this video we're going to look at why a conference is so ineffective and so boring, and how yours doesn't have to be. It all begins with the preparation, so I'm going to share with you my tips and tricks for how to prepare a brilliant agenda that engages your audience and keeps them interested. I'm going to share with you some techniques for getting the best on the day from the audience and from your speakers, how to get the Q&A sessions working well and how to have your audience leaving wanting more. And if you stick around until the end, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to manage your nerves and boost your confidence so that you can deliver at your absolute best and get the best out of your conference for your participants and for your client. So big events, I normally define as kind of 70 people and above. So the reason for that is I think up to about 30 people, you can read the room. You can look at the room, you can see how people are engaging with whatever workshop method you're using. You can extend the time fairly easily. You can change and dance on your feet as I talk about it. So it's much more flexible up to kind of 30, maybe 40, even 50 people, depending on how well you know them and what you're trying to achieve. Once you get above a certain number, and I think, as I say, 70-ish people, you have to move into what I call crowd control. So that's all about having a really structured agenda, really well timed, and then your job is to manage to that agenda on the day. So you can no longer read the room. There's in 70, 100, 200 people, there's always some people that aren't engaging really well with that particular part of the day, and you just have to work through that. How I do that, interestingly, is make sure that the agenda is built with lots of different sessions. So I try to mix it up so that we don't have the same kind of session. So it's not just, for example, presenters and Q&A. There'll be some table discussions. There might be some workshop exercises, something that tries to meet different learning styles to keep everybody engaged. So for a big conference or event requires much more planning typically than a smaller event. That's about making sure your agenda is really well thought through, that you've tested as many different challenges as you can, so that you know that you've designed something that's going to work for you. It's quite challenging to change direction or add in additional things when you're dealing with audience sizes, certainly over 100 people. So it's best to get your planning done really well. So a big event is all about getting the agenda created brilliantly and with lots of detail. That starts with being really clear on the aims and objectives of your session. So that means talking to your client or sponsor of the event to make sure that you're really clear and they're really clear on what you're there to try and do. Could be, for example, a consultation event. That might be a government consultation on new policies or a white paper or something like that. Or might be an organisational strategy, a change programme where you want the views and ideas from a wide group of people. There's lots of different events. So make sure you're clear on the aims of yours and then design the agenda accordingly. When designing the agenda, what I'm looking to do is think about not only each of the individual exercises or sessions through the day, but I'm also trying to think about how that feels as a story through the whole day for participants. So that it might be, for example, you begin with more divergent thinking, exploration of ideas, gathering thoughts and inputs, and then towards the end of the session you might want to start moving more towards priorities and convergent thinking, starting to think about the what next, the what are the recommendations of this event, this group, this conference. The most obvious challenge of running a large event is there's lots of people there. That means you have to be really careful about how you handle the logistics of the day. So thinking about tea and coffee breaks, thinking about where you will be serving tea and coffee. If you've got 100 people or more, you can't do a 10-minute tea or coffee break. You won't get through it in time and you'll simply build a delay in to restarting your next session. If you're sending people off to breakout groups or moving people around in any way, You need to walk the floor and make sure you know where they're going and how you're going to direct people to various rooms or groups that you want them to go to. So you need to really think hard about the logistics, because it will trip you up if you don't on the day and you delay. What you create is delay and confusion and frustration from your participants. So logistics is really important with a big event. Seating plans, another area you need to look at and think about. So typically, depending on who's coming to your event, if it's an organisation and you're running an off-site or strategy session or a consultation event, maybe the people know each other already. They are almost certainly going to sit with their mates, with their teams, if you don't create a seating plan. That might be fine, but I think if you're running an event or a conference, you've paid probably quite a lot of money to put that on, in the room costs, catering costs, facilitators and speakers, etc. And you probably don't want people to turn up and sit with their teams. That's what they do every day. Why would you want to replicate that? There are times when you want to do that, and in fact sometimes I will move groups back into their teams towards the end of the session when I want them to start thinking about planning next steps. So it's quite a neat trick. Begin with a seating plan where people are dispersed and working with members of the conference that they don't normally work with, and then you can look at bringing them back into their teams towards the end, just for maybe our last 20 minutes on next steps and actions. I've tried all kinds of seating plans through the years. One of the things that happens if you do a seating plan is people wonder why you've put them on that table, and they're looking at the other people around the table and thinking, why are you here? Why am I on this table? So I've had some fun. Probably my most fun, 350 people, we did star signs. So we sat people in their dates of birth. And it was great fun to be able to firstly reveal that to them. It was a surprise to them. It takes away immediately any thought that you've been sat around with a group of people chosen specifically. And it gave me a great line of humour throughout the day where I could go and check in on how are the Scorpios doing? How are the Leos tackling this question? So it was a really good fun thing to do. So you can steal that idea if you'd like to. So with a large conference or event, timings become the most important thing. It's all about crowd control, your job as facilitator, and that means having as timed specifics to each of your sessions throughout the day. I tend to aim for 40-minute slots, 40-minute sessions. So that just means I've got enough different things happening through the day that it's going to keep the audience interested, but it's typically long enough for most exercises. It's a bit tough to kind of cover any exercise you can dream up, but breaking it into 40-minute chunks, that might be, for example, I might give a 5-minute presentation or 10-minute presentation, 10 minutes of table talk to consider a question that might have been posed by the speaker, and then I've got 20 minutes to do feedback from the audience in a kind of Q&A/feedback session. And as a facilitator, you will have experienced, if you haven't, it will happen to you, where there'll be you'll ask for questions and there's no hands up, and you've planned 10 or 15 minutes on your agenda for questions. There are no questions. That makes you feel awkward. It makes the speaker feel awkward, and of course your audience are feeling pretty awkward. If you go to table talk first, have them spend some time reflecting on what they've heard, you'll always get questions. And if you don't get any hands up, you can then go to a table and say, table 3, what did you talk about? And they will always have something to share. Remember, you will be the face of this event. You will be the person that opens and introduces the event. You'll be the glue between all the sessions, and you'll be the person that concludes and sends people on their way after your great successful event. That's fantastic, but it means you need to do the thinking about the logistics. Don't rely on an organizer, or worse, a conference venue that tells you it's all fine. You need to walk the floors, find out where the toilets are, find out where the breakout rooms are, find out where lunch and tea and coffee are going to be served. Make sure you know these things. And it's amazing what happens on the day. I have had a session, so it's lunchtime on this big, a couple of 100 people event. And towards the end of lunch, one of the delegates came up to me and she said, excuse me.
There was no cheesecake for me when I got to the front of the queue.
And so I'm about to go on stage for the next part of the afternoon. Funnily enough, I'm not responsible for the catering, and I'm kind of busy in my mind, so I had to go and find someone to put her in touch with one of the organisers. But the point here is, you are the face of the event. If the room's too hot and too cold, if people can't hear, if it's too crowded, all of that falls down onto you. And a word on crowded rooms. Any venue will have, normally a conference venue will have their maximum capacity for each of their rooms. I would strongly advise you never to work at maximum capacity for any session of any duration. You can get away with it for an hour or two, but if it's a day in a room that you've got too many people, it makes people really frustrated. Typically, it also means the temperature control goes out of the window, but the frustration that your audience will find makes your job twice as hard, because they're cross, and they're a bit fed up, and they want to go home, and now it's just doubles your workload in trying to keep them interested and keep them there. In planning your detailed agenda, you'll need to think about the sessions that you're going to run throughout the day. Typically in a large conference, you're going to have at least a couple of speaking slots on the stage, so a keynote speaker perhaps, and some other people that are going to bring inputs, and the standard kind of Q&A that follows those. You'll need to build in most likely some of those into your session, but don't be afraid to get the audience doing stuff as well. So I will often use table talk. So that's where you might give a task or a question to the audience and ask them to talk about it on their tables, and then you can do some sort of feedback. We'll talk more about how to do that well later. You might send people to breakouts, and you can do that in breakout rooms. You can keep them around their tables so that they're a breakout group is around their table, and indeed you can use the market stall focus, so that's more exhibition stand kind of model, where you might have different things going on that are prepared by teams who've brought content to share and maybe get some views on, and have people kind of touring around. So that works well with a large event, but do think hard about the logistics and how people are going to move around in a way where they're not stumbling into each other. So when you're running a large event, it's really important to have a contingency session or sessions up your sleeve. This is something that you can pull out instantly if you've got some time that you need to fill. Now that time might be because presenters have spoken for a much shorter period of time. I've had that happen many times. People are given 20 minutes, they do 5. It might be because the exercise is finished earlier. A lot of reasons it might happen. Typically with a large event, your tea and coffee break's pretty fixed, your lunch break's pretty fixed, and people tend not to thank you for finishing too early, so you need to fill the time. I'll give you a couple of really instant and useful sessions that you can use. So if you've got a keynote speaker, one of the things I have up my sleeve at any time I can drop this in, if we've got 15 minutes or 10 minutes spare, I'll say on your tables, have a discussion and come up with what questions you would like to ask the keynote speaker this afternoon. So 2 things I'm doing there: I'm filling the time and getting the tables talking. I'm getting them interested in what's going to happen later in the day, which means they're starting to think ahead and get hopefully a bit more engaged in firstly staying through the day, but looking forward to what's coming next. Another really useful session which works in most cases is success criteria. What would the success criteria, or what would success look like if we are successful at this? So whatever this is, it might be the new vision for an organisation, a new strategy, a consultation, who knows what it might be, but there's nearly always something you can draw from that. But remember, in all things, timing is your friend. Keeping sessions short is the best way of keeping people interested. It's pretty rare that in a 20-minute Q&A session you haven't covered the ground. It's pretty rare that you need a long time. You'll get the headlines from people quite quickly, and it's always better to leave your participants wanting more, not to be wringing out the very last dregs of every part of each session because your timings were too long. I would much rather finish having not achieved everything than I would having dragged it out and make people bored and looking to go home.